Hey everybody, NHL defenseman Drew Doughty here, Stanley Cup champion against the New York Rangers in most recent memory. I said that for one person. There's one person that if you read this remediate. Anyway, I'm not going to remediate or slow down. I'm going to do something different for you though. So I haven't actually made the card I'm asking you for or the functionality end to end. You have to come to class. We kind of find our way there. I picked through your examples. So I'm going to make the card end to end, obviously around Drew Doughty. So Drew Doughty is a ice hockey defenseman. If you're unaware, right? So I'm going to go grab my source material of some kind. We're going to make the card. So my card is going to be a div. All right, probably going to give it a class. We'll call it wrapper. That's personally what I like to call outermost thing. That wrapper we are going to say has a width, and the width is 400 pixels. I am going to say there is a border to this width. It's 2 pixels solid black. All right, and I'm going to say this is display inline flex, which means when there's multiples, they're all going to go sitting next to each other nicely. I'm always going to close any item I open, so in this case, a div. I'm going to have an img src equals. Images are self-closing tags, which is why you write it that way and not this way. Okay. SRC, I'm going to pull in some ridiculous, there it is. A64 text, which is Drew Doughty. So a couple of you use this in class or you reference an image, right? I found the source of an image directly. So this is like the file contents of said image. So I'm going to have my image, and then we're going to have text below the image. Right? So some of this is back and forth of, am I working structurally? Am I working semantically? All right, so I'm going to have a div container below the thing in question. Put a div there. All right, we need room for some descriptive text and a detail. Now, if you search for HTML detail summary tag, so we got there, we can see there's this thing called details summary. And here we also see via grepper details open. So that's going to default this stuff to be visible by default. So let's do that one. So in my head, I'm trying to think of the way I want this to display. Now, we can already see a problem that this is display flex and all this stuff is just flexing, which is not fantastic. Right? So we might want to change our wrapper. Well, we'll leave it like that for the time being, but I'm going to make another one that is class equals container. And container is going to have my image in it. Whoops. Should color code correctly. I'm not sure what's going on with that. Yahoo. All right, we've got our details here. I'm going to space my details. Kit and tab. I use tabs. If you've watched a certain television program, there's a lot of arguing between if we're doing things via tabs and spaces. So instead of sample, it'll be career stats. And in here, I'm going to put a bulleted list. Stanley Cup champion over the disgraced New York Rangers. Rangers versus LA Kings. Let's make sure that we're accurate with this. Rangers versus LA Kings Stanley Cup 2014. All right, so 2014 is when the Rangers lost the Stanley Cup to Drew Doughty, superstar. However, after winning that cup, 2 cups in about 3 years, completely overpaid toothless wonder. Contract is ridiculous. Anyway, I also have to close my other UL tag here. Okay, and I've got my little career stats. It still looks horrible. but I'm trying to just keep things within the box that I have here. All right, okay, so we've got this wrapper, or this container rather. Now, even though I have the class on it that says container, right, I haven't defined container. However, divs default to display block, which is why this material is now thing. Display block is everything flowing down. Inline flex or inline block would be that the things stack up within the allowable area. So this image, I'm also going to give a class, and that's going to be image. You don't have to do that, but again, I don't like targeting tags directly. An image, we're going to say width is 100%. We'll see if that does anything with the container. Didn't do anything because the image is already here, 100%. But a way that I inspect and start to move this tab over, start to look at the structure and say, okay, what is generating that space off to the side, right? So we've got width 400. If I take that off, we can see it now conforms to the item in question. Now, this image is 318 pixels by 318 pixels. So if I say 100%, that is the image itself is 100%, not the area it's in. So if I say 400 pixels, now we're going to match my design criteria here. It's not, flawless, but at least now it fills the container. So 100 pixels on that image. I'm going to do on the title now. So I don't want that to be a div. All right, we want this to be that Drew Dowdy is a H3 because this is like a smaller portion of the page. And then we're going to have an H4, which is this additional detail about him. All right. Now, this div on these class is going to be, we'll say that this is the header of the card and that the details area class is also details. Again, I can name these whatever I want. I want them to be as simple as possible, no spaces. There's none of this crap, all lowercase. You could name it anything you want. Don't do that though. Now, if you're trying to match BEM, which we discussed in class, and you have an intentional naming convention as to why you're doing whatever, as long as it's intentional, intentionality is key. So I've got the image. I'm going to say dot header in this case, and the header is going to be text align center. Font weight is bold. Font size. I'm going to do 2 rems. We'll see what that does. All right, so it kind of scales everything up relative. I don't want there to be a margin on this. Now that won't do anything. Okay, but you can see that, and I mentioned a lot of people use headings because of the way they're designed. But if I look at a heading, an H4 and an H3 natively, and that's what you're seeing here when you see user agent style sheet, that means what the browser's doing by default. So respecting that value, in this case, it says margin block start, margin block end, very specific ways of detailing how this is spaced, is 1.33 ems. So you can look up what ems are as far as a unit is relative to the size of the whole document or relative to the parent font size container. This allows you to do things in nice, happy ratios if you so choose. But that could be different in Safari. That could be different in Firefox. That could be different in Opera. That could be different in Edge. Now, largely they're kind of normalizing, but this user agent style sheet, that is what is just magically coming from the browser as the default for that tag. This is why I'm always applying styling. I don't want to just say, oh, that's what an H4 looks like. What I want H4 to be is a heading that is the 4th level heading. It is the semantic intention of the thing. So I'm not just using details because I want to name this details. Details has semantic intention and it provides certain default functionality. So in this case, in HTML, it automatically does this. Notice I've written no JavaScript yet, and we have this nice collapse reveal sort of a relationship. Also, the thing it does, I'm tabbing right now on my keyboard, if I hit tab, it's selected in focus so that if I hit spacebar or enter, I can expand and collapse that automatically. So that just happens. So if there's a way to do that natively in the browser, then use that. Now, as part of this specific thing, I would go to can I use, and I'd say details. And say, oh, details and summary elements are not supported in IE. Now, I don't care about that. Most of you aren't even going to know what IE11 is, hopefully. But if you work in an organization that needs IE11 support, then you need to take that into account. That's why this page becomes important. For what we're doing in class, probably don't need to go to this for a lot of things. But if there's some tag you've never heard of, a JavaScript API or approach that you're not sure, you throw it into can I use, and it'll tell you, is this just going to work everywhere, right? So if I do get element by ID, for example, spelled it correct. There we go. By class name or by ID, we can see that get element by ID does not work in Chrome 4. Now, I don't have a reason to do that, but it's that sort of a thing. As I've mentioned multiple times, JavaScript changes over time, but is still all compatible. Get query selector. Right, the query selector does not work in IE 6 and 7, but it's worked since the dawn of time in all browsers. So that's part of why we're using it. Anyway, back to our details summary thing. So I've got these headings. What I want to do is then I want to say header, dot header, right, because it's a class. And then I'm just going to target the H3 in this case, right? So it cascades. It's this thing that has an H3 within it. So in that case, I want margin to be 0. So I'm forcibly resetting what the browser is going to give me. Now, I can write this next CSS two different ways. If I want to do it with the H4, I can do dot header H4, and I can do margin 0, or actually, we'll say margin is like 5. We'll go 8. Let's say this is 16. Now, that is going to provide standardization across browsers. They're all going to interpret that the same way. There's two different ways I could write this, and I'll keep them uniform for the purposes of this. I can write it like this, or I can take that first part and you do a comma. When you have a comma there, that means this thing or this thing, apply this. So now I've got uniform margins on my H3s and my H4s. The H3s and H4s can be made to look identical. There's nothing saying they have to look that way. So if I say font size is 10 pixels, they're going to be 10 pixels apiece, right? So those headings are the defaults of the browser, but it's more important semantics to say it is a heading. This will become important when we discuss accessibility later on down the road. But for right now, I'll make Drew Dowdy like that. Now we've got details. So I'm going to do dot details, right? And the details area has a summary. So the thing I actually want to target is the summary tag. Now, details is a little specific. The details tag and summary, they only work in this way, so you might not need a class to target them. Notice I haven't used any IDs because I've also asked you to remove IDs from everything you do. So please do that and replace them with these sorts of buttons. So dot details, summary, and then I'm going to say font size is 20 pixels. We're going to say font weight is bold. Okay, and then I'm going to say on the details tag, just to mix it up a bit, that there's going to be a margin hyphen left because you can define a specific margin. I'm going to push that in from the side. I actually want to push that in like 24. 4, type right. There we go. All right, so we pull that in 24. Let's also add some padding on there. That's about 10 pixels. Okay, so that gives it a nice spacing, right? Padding is the item pushing out versus margins is the things pushing away. Open. Cool. We could also default that to open in the HTML if I just said open. Right, so that'll default it to open, toggling that attribute. Another thing I can do, because we need to start getting into the JavaScript side of this, right, is I can do, let's say var, and just so we're clear, var const and let are all ways of defining a variable. It just has to do with scoping. Var is the way we used to do it forever ago. It still works perfectly fine. Const means it is a constant value. You cannot modify it after the fact. And let means you can modify it, but just within a certain context. We might have examples where that comes up, but just so that you're aware that you might see all three. If I'm referencing a variable that I'm not going to modify the actual thing itself, right? So in this case, a DOM node, I can still modify the things underneath it. So it's a little wonky what is constant there. But I'm going to say const, and we'll target the details thing. We'll do document.query selector. Now, to get details or the summary button, I'm going to say detail. Actually, we'll do summary because I want it to be on the summary tag itself, and we'll traverse a little bit. So give me a reference to the summary tag. Okay, now I'm going to add some buttons below. Actually, I do it above everything, right? Because you had to do it above everything. So I've got my wrapper, right? And I can collapse this and it goes down to nothing. Sweet. So we've got a compartmentalized, meaning I could copy all this gobbledygook, which I've also asked you to do, and paste. And now I should get 2 Drew Dowdies, because who wants to have one blue line that costs $11 million a year when you can have 2 parts of a blue line that cost $22 million a year? Anyway, let's get rid of Drew for now. I'm just trolling on Drew. I don't mind Drew Dowdy. All right, button. And this button is going to be called toggle. Right, so I want a useful label. So toggle stats. Okay, now this one I could give an ID, but I hate IDs. I'm actually going to use a different type of selector. So I'm going to say data hyphen toggle hyphen btn. Another fun aspect of HTML, if you use data hyphen, and as long as it's lowercase, you can put whatever you want there as an attribute on this. Any attribute I can then query select against. So for the toggle button, I'll copy that. Let's say document.query selector. The way that you do a attribute-based selector is that. To make it even more specific, I could say button, right? So this is a valid CSS selector as well, which is a good way of testing. So I go into my HTML, write that, and I can say border 10 pixels. Something ridiculous. Oops, it doesn't have a color. Orange, dashed. There we go. So let's make that padding 10 pixels or 12 pixels, and we'll make font size. I don't want to put the full font size of this stuff because I'm blind. We'll make this like 32 pixels, right? So it's a nice big toggle button. Another thing I might do here is I might say display block. We'll see what happens. Boom, goes up top. Because the default for a button is to have them just all be together. So let's make, right, refactoring this. I want my buttons, all of them, to be this way. I'm going to make a container called buttons. It's a class, and that's going to be display block, just so we're perfectly clear. It's display block, but it would be by default anyway. And then I'm going to take a div class equals buttons. Right, tab that in, which is just for visual. All right, I'll make 3 of them. Now we've got our different buttons across the top. I'm going to say this is not a toggle button. This next one is going to be the class equals duplicate. And I'm doing this multiple ways so you can see these are all functionally equivalent, right? So I'm going to duplicate class card. And I'm going to make this one an ID based, those ID selectors, and this is going to be delete last card. Now you might see that I've already put an error there, and it actually underlines it to let me know there's something wrong with this, which is a nice little highlighting thing in here. It should also do that in VS Code when we move to that next week or later on today. So I'm going to make that all one word. You can technically make identifiers be capitals. They're not supposed to be. That's stuff where the browser will clean up for you. All right. We also had stuff associated with hover and focus states that was asked for. So I'm going to say dot buttons, button, so it's a composite, colon hover, which means when I hover over a button, but only if it's within this button's container. So to demonstrate that fact, we take the toggle button out of the container, and on hover, I'm going to say background hyphen color is RGBA, which is short for red, green, blue, alpha level. So I'm going to say that it's 200 levels of red, 0 levels of blue, green, and 50 levels of blue, and I'll have an alpha of 0.5. So if I hover this, it doesn't do anything. If I hover this, I get this wonderful pink Valentine's Day color. All right. If I now take this and I move it within that class of buttons, right, now it picks up those traits. So that's another design paradigm as to why I might want to apply styling under these composite selection criteria. It also says to normalize hover with focus. So I'm going to do :focus. And what that means is, oops, I just have a comma there. Save, because I haven't saved yet. Now what that means is if I tab, notice it applies the same thing as if I'm hovering. There's still one more pseudo state that's pretty common, and that's called active. And so I will do active as a separate state. I usually like to visualize that separately. Sometimes I'll do it the same way. So in this case, I'll say that it's 200. Oh, let's see the insert key. 200, and this one is 50. Oh, broken CSS. Okay, so notice the color coding was off. There we go. So active is when I'm clicking down on the thing. Notice it changes to that bluish purple, right? So that would be a way of delegating between what I'm not thinking about working on, right? And normalizing that state. Right, I tab around, if it'll focus in here, geez, there we go. Tab around through the items, or I select and I'm getting that visual feedback. This is especially important if I'm tapping on like a mobile device, right? Because there is no concept of hover. You're not like hovering over the thing with your thumb. It's not going to register that. So let's see, we've got button, data, toggle button. All right, so I'm going to add an event listener to this. So I'm going to say dot add event listener, and I'm going to listen for a click. Sure, my little window is zoomed down. You don't care about me that much. All right, so I'm going to do it with this way of writing a open context type of a function. We don't need to worry about the difference between this right now, but just so that we're familiar with the syntax, right? Copy, steal from myself. I write function like this. And while there is a difference between these, this is a more modern syntax. This is an older syntax. You're still going to see both of them. They're still going to evaluate the same, basically. So, all right, I've got data toggle button. And when I toggle the button, I'm going to select the details item. I'm going to say dot. So now I have access to the summary, right? I'm thinking in my head. Now the summary is this, right? I can go up to the parent. So I can say dot parent node, and let's do a console log just so we can see what's going on there. So now when I click on the toggle button, I'm getting the details item printed out. Okay, so now I've accessed the details item. Even though I query selected summary, I moved up to the parent node. So anything that you can do by typing in these windows, you can do via here, as we've said multiple times. So the parent node dot set attribute, and I'm going to set open. It's a little weird, but I just set open to open. So now when I click toggle, it expands this. Now it's not gonna, all right, it just expands it. Doesn't do the other aspect of that, so toggling between. And now the way I can handle that, right, is I can say details.parent node. So we'll say if details.parent node.get attribute open. Then what I want to do is details.parent node.remove attribute open. Otherwise, I want to set it to open. This is not a hack, but like sort of a hack as far as mental models are concerned. And let's inspect so we can see this actually take place. So we'll move this over. Move this over. No. All right, there's Drew. Okay. So now when I click toggle, details says open equals open. And this is because open is a Boolean. And unfortunately, because of the way HTML works, if I just set open, I could have no value, but that is implied to be open equals open. So if you're doing a Boolean in the attributes of the page, it's the value equals the name of the attribute. So if this was stuff equals stuff, it would be that. Right. So now when I toggle it, it collapses. Right. So I've got the ability to do both. Right. I can either just click this and open it, and I can click this and close it again. So let's take here. Okay. So I've got that toggling. Now let's target the duplicate button. Target the duplicate button via query select dot duplicate. Right. So instead of the button, and I'm going to comment my code. I do that with 2 backslashes. So I'd say toggle the first instance of the stats. Right. Because even if there's multiple, query selector is only giving me one item. So then we're going to do duplicate the first item. Okay. And so to duplicate the first item, all right, I'm going to do, and I do this a lot of times, just copy and paste, query select the very first item. And a way of defining the first item is, right, dot wrapper, because that is the card in question. I'm going to query select dot wrapper, and do dot clone node true. Clone node is going to generate a copy of it. I'm going to say const stuff, which is not a very good variable name. We'll say item to clone. Right now, a JavaScript variable, I couldn't name this item -to -clone. So this is where you'll see camel cased, right? Like bump, 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 versus dash cased. Dash cased, which is this, you'll see in the HTML DOM, right, as an attribute. Camel cased, we'll see as the way of referencing a similar thing, but via variable in JavaScript. So now I've got item to clone. So now I've got a clone of it, but it's not in the page anywhere. So I need to reference the document. And I need dot append, dot body, dot append child, item to clone. So now when I duplicate, I get an identical copy of what that is. Now the other fun part of this is if I toggle this open and I duplicate, the first one is not open, the second one is. It is a literal copy of the state of everything going on right then. But it's not the JavaScript events. This is a critical distinction. When you're cloning something, you are getting the HTML clone of whatever that is. Water. You're not getting the JavaScript events. So if you've attached events to any of that stuff, it's not going to be replicated. And it's kind of a silly design decision. I forget that I was reading why they did it that way. I think it's for like polluting the DOM. You didn't want to assume that you were copying all of the interactive aspects of it. You could reapply the interactive aspects of it. And so let's say that I had some hover state, and this is another reason to use CSS as much as possible, right? If I had a hover state on Drew Dowdy, as far as the name. So if I had header.h3, let's make this hover and font style italic. And so now Drew Dowdy goes italics. Another fun thing is I could say transition, and I'll say 0.3s for 0.3 of a second. Ease -in -out, and then I'm just going to apply this to font style. Oh, it didn't do it. You can't do that to font style. Maybe I have to say it's normal first. Let's see. Oh, maybe you can't do that to font style. Let's do font size. Now I'm curious. Font size, 10 pixels. Oh, let's do all. There we go. Now it's transitioning everything. So if we take off font size, perhaps it will now transition it. Maybe I couldn't. Nope, you can't transition italics. It kind of makes sense because it literally switches the font out underneath. But if I wanted the font hyphen size to equal 1.1 ems, this kind of means make it like 10%. There we go. Right. So now it sort of looks like it zooms in. That will apply if I duplicate the card, right? However, if I did that via a JavaScript event, it's not going to apply. Now I could reapply an event to something. So let's say when we clone something, we appended it into the page. Then I can do item to clone dot add event listener. And when we mouse enter, and run a function. And when we enter this item, we're going to say alert, mostly just confusing, all right? So this is not in the original. I duplicate the card, and now, haha, you got pwned. Okay, so you can attach those events to that item after the fact, or I could go back and select the first one, but it's not on both. If I apply that event to the original, it's not coming across to the second one. And to illustrate that, if I make another copy of this, right, we'll do wrapper. We'll just copy this code, wrapper, say haha. So now, if I hover this, I get haha, but if I duplicate and I hover this one, I don't have that event, but I do have the styling that comes across. So this will give me duplicating a whole bunch of things, right? We've got some differences between hover, and I did a mouse enter there, right, which is that as one of the possible events. So let's wire up that delete, but make sure we don't delete everything. So again, I usually copy things I already have. So delete the last item, make sure that makes sense. I'm going to look at the ID. An ID selector is a pound symbol. And when we click on delete, we are going to say, a little fancy, let wants to equal confirm, are you sure? Then if wants to, so a confirmation dialog is going to give us a Boolean back as the value. So if we actually want to delete the last one, we're going to do a document dot, query selector. And we're going to say dot wrapper, but we're going to do some Google foo. So we're going to say CSS selector last child parent, last child with class. There we go. There is a selector to say target this, but the last instance of it. So with this CSS selector, I am drastically reducing what a lot of you wrote as the way of obtaining the last item. Right, so I can do colon last hyphen child, because any selection I can do via CSS, I can do via this. And then I'm just going to say remove. Now, there's a lot of other solutions we covered in class that solve this problem differently, but I boiled that down to one line there. So if I hit delete, are you sure you want to delete it? No, I don't want to delete it right now because it'll go away completely. But a way around that, and let's actually just delete it. Yeah, let's delete it. Right, so it goes away, and now I can't duplicate anything, and I've generated JavaScript errors. I can't toggle anything. Okay, so I could check that this is the same item as something else. So give me the last one, and here's a fun hack for this. So if you want to do it, right, and let's verify, if I hit duplicate, it does it. If I hit delete and I say no, it doesn't do it. Now if I hit delete and I say okay, it goes away. You want to do it, and, which is, so this is how you chain these together, and the last selector is not literally equal to the first item selector. So if I do a query selector for wrapper and the last child is the first child, because query selector for .wrapper will give me the first instance, don't do the operation because this could be problematic. Now, I could also not do that in that case. I could say if these are equal, right? If they're not equal, do the thing where we remove it. Otherwise, alert right? Drew is immortal. We cannot delete Drew. I also recall now that there's an additional thing I asked you to do, which was modify title. So change name, right? And so if we do dot modify title, say, copy that, modify name of first item, hit modify title. And these are in part done at this speed because this is how I work, but you can obviously slow this video down if you need to. So wants to, and instead of a confirm, it's a prompt. Name Drew, right? So what do we want to name Drew now? And instead, we have name. So if we got a name, make sure we don't make it blank, right? So if we got a name, then we are going to select this item again, which is Drew, right? We're going to do dot query selector h3 in this case, which is not the best way to achieve this, dot inner text equals name. So if I do nothing, it doesn't do anything. If I cancel, it doesn't do anything. But if I change name to overpaid, it does something. And now I just showed you a additional bizarre convention at first glance, but that is super useful. So if I've got this document, right, and I'm running a query selector, it's that I can run a query selector against an object. So you can select one node and then query select the things underneath that node independently. So I could query select the H3s, but only if they've already been within the wrapper in this case. Another way of rewriting this be like that. Give me just the H3 that's within the wrapper. So now when I change name to overpaid, right, it updates. And but I can duplicate the thing and I can change the name of Drew back to Drew. The other fun thing, since I cloned overpaid, now I've got an overpaid defensive line. Delete, delete. But now I still have a few overpaid defensemen. Delete more, right? So now I've just got one overpaid defenseman and I've got lovely Drew missing his front teeth. So I hope this is useful. Oh, you know what? I didn't do a media query, and a couple of you asked media query CSS, right? So a lot of times I'll do this because I always forget the syntax. So then when you ask me, like, how do you handwrite it? I always just say, hey, do it, because I always goof this up. So let's say big smartphone. And this is a nice little guide here, actually. This is, not totally true, but so we'll just copy all. No, I don't want to add one. Copy all three. Right, so I'll put these at the bottom. I have to. So we're going to say dot wrapper background type and color orange. Actually, let's go pink because that's what my hat is, since that pink one, and then dot wrapper background color is purple because they have been purple in the past, and then all the way down at smartphone level, we'll say that wrapper font size is 1M, so the font size is all changed, hopefully, all down to shrinky stuff, and we'll say details is display none, so details go away on this super small screen, and the dot wrapper, because you can write as many of these as you want, all right, we can say font size equals 1.1M. That is going to take priority over the other one, right? Because it's still cascading. So once we're at this super small screen, the first one will run, and then it'll be like, oh, it should actually be this. So make sure that you're consolidating these things into singular calls here, right? I wouldn't want to say dot wrapper is that, and then font weight, bold, I wouldn't want to do that, or I'd say normal. Now I could write it this way, or, right, it's less work, it's easier to maintain, put it in one block. So now for Drew, let's duplicate Drew, scale down, Drew turns purple, right? And now Drew's details go away. Now it's not applying the font size, meaning there's some more specific selector. So there's one brute force way I can do this is important. Well, maybe not. Maybe important is not applying to that because it's still not specific enough. Okay. So, or that is what 1M is. So let's say it's 10 pixels on the wrapper. So if font size is defined in these items, then are you sure to delete Drew? You cannot delete Drew. So then that will take priority. So if I say dot wrapper h or dot header, right? I believe is what I call the container for those things. Yep, dot header. And then we'll say h3. This gets much more specific, and we'll say this is 12 pixels. Dot wrapper, dot header, h4. We'll say is 10 pixels. Important. There's still a more specific CSS selector here, so that's interesting. And I can't diagnose that card. It's funny at the moment. So, all right, let's take Drew. We'll zoom in. H3, dot header, H4. So even at this really small, oh, there we go. Sorry, I wasn't hitting the actual breakpoint for it. So now we can see that this media query has taken effect. And the other neat thing, and not that there's a reason to scale this font in and out, but because I have transition and I'm saying everything transitions, you get this nice sliding animated effect. So if I say margin is 10 pixels, then as I move the window, we'll get that nice like scale up and down, and like it's getting ticked off that I have the window open with me. Because of when you have inspector open, sometimes it makes the document so complex that it's going to mess with, and my fans are actually kicking on. But all right, so I'm going to save that, send this video out. So if you watch this and you're still like, I don't know how to make my card, then there's the internet, there's office hours, but I need more specifics than just like a ghost saying, slow down. Go. We've iterated over this twice. Used a lot of variation of options. TA is going to go through and give feedback on your individual cards after this week, but make sure that you're asking specific questions if you're not getting these things. Now, this is not to say that we're just assuming this and never coming back to it. The reason we're going to keep plowing forward is these ways of doing things are legacy. So JavaScript is not, HTML is not, CSS is not on their own. So it's important to know those by themselves. However, no one is going to just write stuff this way anymore. Everybody building applications, which this is a programming for the web, not a making fun Drew Doughty memes and seeing his career achievement as defeating the Rangers in 2014 via a details tag, right? This is to give you a actual career skill that you can go out and try to print money and make the machine go brr off of. And that's not HTML. That's going to be the frameworks that leverage these three. So we're going to keep revisiting these as we get into tooling land, and tooling land is going to take up basically the rest of the class. This is, in my mind, remedial land, because this is the baseline stuff you need to have in order to comprehend where we're going to go. So these will keep coming up through examples. I also mentioned part of knowing the web and learning it is feeling a bit lost at times. This is also why I Google things, right? So if you can get the fundamentals of a concept, like in HTML, how do I select fill in the blank? Or in CSS, how do I, right? Another newer thing might be ask ChatGPT to figure out an example, and it might give you a better response than Google, honestly, and write its own little fake Wikipedia page that's factually inaccurate. But whatever way you learn best, I'm providing some links to some remedial low-level tutorial stuff for syntax in all three. I recommend you go through them if you're still struggling with this stuff, or even if you've crushed this stuff, I recommend you go through them. And soon it will be into tooling land.